Few planes have cemented themselves in history as much as the legendary Harrier jump jet. And since this plane won the vote, I now present, without further ado, the Harrier video. The Harrier is a legendary aircraft with a long service life of over 50 years across many variants and countries, being so widespread that it was built by not one, not two, but technically 3 different manufacturers at different times. In War Thunder, the Harrier is a pivotal aircraft found across many battle ratings in different models, and is one of the most fun aircraft to fly at those battle ratings usually. So whether you are a Flavor of the Month Scrub Lord looking at how to fly your shiny new AV-8B Plus that just got added to the US tree, or a certified VTOL enjoyer, I will show you how to fly the whistling shit can in War Thunder. Few planes in history have such an iconic reputation, strong enough to not only cement themselves in aviation history for all of eternity, but to become a cultural icon, a staple of pop culture, a meester of controversy, and a spectacular, accident-prone, unconventional design. This is the plane of many names. The US Marines called it the Widowmaker because of its accident rate. The Brits called it the Hoverbug for its unique VTOL capability, and despite not agreeing on much, the US Marines and the Royal Navy both had another common nickname for their Harriers, and my favorite one, the Whistling Shit Can. You know this plane is famous when you go to Google, type the name of a bird, and instead get a jet as your first few results before actually seeing the bird that it was named after. The Harrier was a truly unique aircraft. So unique that it stands out in history and cements itself in the aviation world. And its story begins just after the Korean ceasefire. Throughout the 50s, the Korean War had shown that far deployments for defensive aviation could only be accomplished from either hastily made rough airfields or from aircraft carriers stationed in the theater. It took too long to prepare and build airfields that were constructed and paved up to standard for the latest jet fighters. And with the takeoff distance of more advanced jet aircraft steadily increasing, it became clear that airfields are now a strategic component in any future conflict, and such a strategic key point would also be a vital target and a weak point as well. It was known that in the ongoing Cold War, if it ever went hot, the first target would be vital air bases and runways. The ability to ground an entire air force indefinitely by simply removing the runway was a massive threat, and countries began developing 2 solutions for this problem throughout the late 50s and early 60s. The first was preparing their aircraft for operation from concealed civilian roadways, most famously in the case of Sweden and Germany, who had built the Motorväg and the Autobahn respectively as civilian transport during the 30s and 40s, but decided to rebuild long reinforced sections which could be used as runways in a war during the 50s. Aircraft were also prepared by reinforcing the landing gear and creating short takeoff and landing, or STOL, systems, either with thrust reversers, large flaps and slats, or variable geometry wings. The second approach was to simply eliminate the takeoff and landing distance, by doing it vertically like a helicopter. Vertical takeoff and landing, or VTOL, was not a new concept. However, the world simply had not had the viable technology to create reliable and reusable VTOL aircraft previously. So while most countries focused on STOL at this time, in 1957, a little company called Bristol Engines in the United Kingdom decided to call up their friend, Hawker Aircraft, previously famous for making planes such as the Hurricane and the Fury. The once aviation giant was starting to fall off, and was in the process of merging with Siddeley to create Hawker Siddeley to try and stay afloat. Bristol Engines, on the phone, goes, "Oi mate, listen up, right? We got this bloomin' bonkers new engine in it. It's a proper marvel it is. Can make a bloody plane go straight up like a helicopter. And then, hold on to your knickers, straight forward, like a bloody rocket. I know, sounds daft, but you gotta trust me on this, mate, alright?" So Hawker, realizing they literally need whatever they can to stay afloat, decided to use this new engine to make a proper VTOL aircraft that's functional enough to be used for the military. The British Ministry of Defence decided that this was a very stupid fucking idea and never gave them any funding. But Hawker was really desperate, so they reworded their plan and decided to say that instead that they're building a light tactical support fighter for NATO's specification. This way, they can get funding from NATO's Mutual Weapon Development Program. The first prototype, the Hawker P1127, was a privately funded testbed for the new Pegasus engine from Bristol. After further development and ironing out the problems and completing the merge with Siddeley, the aircraft was ready. The P1127 prototype, now renamed to the Hawker Siddeley Kestrel FGA-1, surpassed all expectations and went on to become the staple of the Royal Air Force. Just kidding, the first prototype crashed in testing and was lost, but at least the pilot survived. Surely, it couldn't get any worse for the Kestrel. But it did, since the second prototype crashed far more violently not long after, killing the pilot. This was basically the nail in the coffin for the RAF and the Royal Navy acquiring this new VTOL for now, so Hawker Siddeley decided on a final pitch. They threw the design at the US Air Force and the German Luftwaffe, who promptly rejected it for two different reasons. To make matters worse, NATO also cancelled the requirements for the light tactical support aircraft, so Hawker Siddeley at this point was about to go broke with funding the Kestrel. Surely it couldn't get any worse, so Hawker Siddeley tried a final pitch effort, and they tried to display it at the 1963 Paris Air Show in the hopes of finding any foreign buyers. Things were actually going pretty well. The Salt had just demonstrated their own VTOL, the Mirage 3V, just before the P1127 Kestrel, and now the Kestrel was outperforming and outdoing the Mirage in the VTOL maneuvers that it's demonstrating. It was all going very well for the Kestrel. Until it wasn't.
Bad luck for Britain. The cause of the crash is so far unknown, but the show goes on.
The third prototype crashed on landing. While the pilot survived, the third Kestrel prototype was effectively destroyed. The VTOL Mirage now garnered all the foreign attention as the Kestrel crashed and burned in front of the world. The Kestrel, and the entirety of the British VTOL program at this point, was considered officially dead. But unofficially, Hawker wasn't a quitter. They made the plane that won the Battle of Britain, for fuck's sake, and they were not going to fall under now of all times. Not when the world needed them the most. This new VTOL was going to be their final stand, their all-in gamble. Hawker Siddeley was developing an even more advanced P1127 Kestrel with their free time, a supersonic VTOL fighter attacker called the P1154. The RAF at this point showed interest in the new P1154. Hawker Siddeley poured pretty much all their remaining resources into redesigning the P1154 with elements of the P1127, completely from the ground up, very quickly in the short span of only 3 years for the British requirements. It was not supersonic anymore, but at least it worked. This was everything they had. If the VTOL project failed now, Hawker Siddeley, as a company, was dead. 3 years of tediously accelerated in-house development and testing using nothing but private funding were finally finished in 1965. The RAF reluctantly ordered 6 prototypes of this new aircraft in late 1965. At the final stages of this development cycle, the upgraded VTOL received a new name, the Harrier. And a few months later, on the 31st of August 1966, the first of these new birds would officially perform its first flight. Around this time, a tripartite evaluation program was restarted once again, with the Harrier also being presented to US and West German pilots for evaluation. West Germany, once again, was too fucking broke to buy them, so that didn't get anywhere. But they liked the idea of a VTOL plane, so they went and designed whatever the fuck this is. America, on the other hand, now with the problems ironed out, saw use for the Harrier and decided to order their own version, designated as the AV-8 Harrier for the US Marine Corps. In 1969, the first Harrier GR.1s were delivered to RAF squadrons to officially enter service, and only 2 years later, in 1971, the first AV-8A arrived on US soil to enter service with the Marine Corps. This was the beginning of the Harrier story. The first generation Harriers are very pivotal planes in War Thunder. I know, I'm very funny. Anyways, these are the lowest battle rating Harriers in game, with all of them sitting at 9.7. There is 4 of them, 2 in the US and 2 in the British tree, with 1 being a premium and 1 being free in each tech tree. Let's start with the Brit Bongs. This is the Harrier GR.1 and 9.7 premium. I ain't gonna sugarcoat this for you. This thing is a pile of shit. It has no flares, no guided ordnance, no RWR, no bitches, horrible flight performance, and instead of missiles, you get, telephone poles with a half-built BBC micro for a guidance system, and the range of someone taking a piss. This is the SRAM, which stands for Short Range Air-to-Air Missile, and short range it fucking is. It has no fins or aerodynamic surfaces whatsoever. It turns with thrust vectoring. And you're probably thinking to yourself, wow, a thrust vectoring 50G missile at 9.7 is surely broken. Except that it isn't. For starters, this is a late 60s design and technology wasn't the best back then. The Seeker is rear aspect only, and it's super sensitive. This is probably the only missile in game, as far as I'm aware, that's even more flare hungry than the R-60. Oh, and remember how it has no aerodynamic surfaces? Yeah, after the motor runs out of fuel, the missile cannot steer and straight up just falls out of the sky. To prevent it falling into enemy hands, the Brits added a failsafe that makes it self-destruct as soon as it runs out of fuel, so lobbing itself into targets is also out of the question. So basically, what you have is an R-60 with an even worse Seeker and even less range. It literally fucking explodes when it reaches 1.5 kilometers. For comparison, the AIM-9L, just one fucking BR step above you, can comfortably hit stuff at 5 kilometers, has decent flare resistance, and an all-aspect Seeker. I'ma be honest with you, just like me, most players who were around 4 years ago when this thing was added will look at how much it suffers today and tell you, yeah, it deserves it. On release, the Harrier GR.1 was the single most overpowered plane in game up until that point. But since then, more overpowered stuff at that same BR range was added. The plane itself was nerfed into the ground. Its missiles were neutered into useless spasticated meme sticks. And worst of all, Keygen has added even more under-tiered premiums with all-aspect slingers, which completely fucked over anything that doesn't have flares, including this piece of shit. This thing today is a painful sack of shit. As a premium jet, it's just fucking useless. You're almost never going to get kills because your missiles don't work, and you just don't have the flight performance to get your guns on target or play aggressively. Oh, you want to bomb bases to grind? Well, you're also not getting anywhere because of your shitty bomb load and the fact that you're subsonic, meaning that literally everyone else is going to beat you to the bases. And finally, let's talk about those guns. The Aiden 30, which was a pretty nice gun back at like, I don't know, 8.3? Yeah, now at 9.7 it's kinda shitter. Enemies around you will have Vulcans and the Soviet potato dispensers with better accuracy and higher rates of fire than the Aiden. But what the Aiden lacks in, literally everything else, it makes up for in sheer punching power. Unless it's a F5 with its patented Keygen bullshit damage model, anything you hit with the Aiden will usually die in a single hit. And if it doesn't, it's gonna be missing enough of its plane that it dies a few seconds later by itself. This gun definitely takes time getting used to, thanks to the shit velocity and rate of fire. By now you're probably wondering, why am I carrying these 2 rocket pods together in some clips, and not in others? Well, these 2 rocket pods are the flares I got for £2.99 with the Tesco meal deal, and I stopped using them after about, I don't know, 3 games. All clips you see without the rocket pods were recorded after I grew my second brain cell. Remember how we used rocket pods as flares on flareless planes in older videos, like the MiG-23BN? Yeah, that worked because the rockets were big and hot, and the plane was not. The Harrier is hot as shit, and the problem is multiplied by 4 times because of Gaijin's spaghetti code. You see, the game engine this shitty game runs on sees 4 nozzles with 4 heat outputs, and goes, 4 engines! In English, even though the plane has 1 engine, War Thunder gives you the heat signature of a plane with 4 engines. You're not flaring anything away in rear aspect, except maybe R-60s and magic ones. And that's with the real flares. The Matra snabs on the Harrier GR.1 are fucking tiny for rockets, and really just compared to any other rocket at this BR. As a result, you have these firecrackers that almost never work as flares. On an airframe, that's actually one of the hottest in-game, and with this doo-doo-ass maneuverability of the first generation Harrier airframe, you are dying to pretty much anything you see that is not an AIM-9B. And you can have this incredibly not fun experience for the low price of only 9,090 Golden Eagles. That's a one-time fee of almost $50 to get fucked in the ass without lube for the most 9.7 experience I have had in a long time. I can't pin my hand on this thing's playstyle. I've had supposedly bad or out-of-meta flareless planes work before one way or another, even if it wasn't fun. But this one is a whole new low. I have been subjected to the most exquisite cock and ball torture trying to play this thing, and with all due respect, if you need a high-tier premium to grind Britain, this is not it, chief. If you buy this thing, you're either a hardcore Harrier fan who wants to collect them all, or an actual fucking retard. Or maybe you bought this thing back when it was downright overpowered for like, I don't know, a month on release. At that point, I kindly ask you to go commit a Charles Rosberg. In-game, not in real life. That would kill you. Anyways, moving on to actually playable Harriers. This is the Harrier GR3, an upgrade to the GR1 that the RAF conceived in 1976. The fact that it took them 7 fucking years to fix the problems in the GR1 is a problem in itself that I'm not going to delve into too much. Externally, it's just a GR1 with a traffic cone taped to the nose. However, the changes are mostly internal, and they make quite the difference. You get an actual flare dispenser, a better fire control system that lets you use the AIM-9G, an actual missile, unlike the SRAMs, and a slightly better engine, as the Pegasus Mark 101 engine was upgraded into the Mark 103 now. This thing is the complete opposite side of the same coin as the Harrier GR1. Unlike the GR1, which is completely unplayable, the GR3, along with the 2 other first-gen Harriers we'll talk about in a second, are some of the most fun 9.7s I have ever played. Let me put it this way, you have the flight performance to just go to space, and if you run into any R3Rs or AIM-9Cs, not only can you actually detect their launches now since you have a RWR, but you can just chaff them away because you actually get 60 countermeasures. And if you run into any A5Cs or enemy Harriers, you can just flare their missiles away. This means you can just safely sit in low Earth orbit and swoop down to orbital strike any poor flareless jet you see with your AIM-9G, which, as we learned last video, has a generous range for a rear aspect IR missile. On top of that, the upgraded engine makes quite the difference in maneuverability. But wait, Donut, how does an engine turn a brick into even more maneuverable brick? You see, if you didn't learn anything from the Phantom, thrust is everything, and even more so in the Harrier because of VIFing. What is VIFing? VIF, or Vector in Forward Flight, is a signature dogfight technique executed by the Harriers, and most other VTOLs, for one of 2 purposes. The first is decreasing your turn radius, making you turn tighter. And 2, rapid deceleration from lateral movement, to evade an incoming attack or force a pursuing aircraft to overshoot. It's kinda like a Kashy's discount bin version of the Cobra maneuver. I can make a cool War Thunder demonstration or animation, but instead, I'm gonna let this scene from one of my favorite animes demonstrate how VIFing works. Let's quickly explain the fundamental dynamics behind this. On the Harriers, you may have noticed that the nozzles in full VTOL sweep don't actually deploy straight down. Instead, they're angled slightly forward. Besides giving the Harrier the party trick of slowly drifting backwards at air shows, this also allows rapid deceleration from higher speeds when the nozzles are fully rotated. Alternatively, you don't have to rotate the nozzles all the way, as the first kind of VIFing we talked about is actually even more effective with a partial rotation, usually only 50 to 80%. This changes your center of thrust to be misaligned with your forward momentum, by pushing the plane up and forward instead of just forward. You can get around the horrible dynamics of the Harrier this way, and lower your turning radius, turning noticeably better than the Harrier normally can. Viffing is a very important dogfight technique for the Harriers, so I recommend binding keys for your VTOL controls and practicing it a bit in test flight, or in a custom battle with friends. I can't stress enough how many times Viffing has saved my ass in a dogfight. All in all, the upgraded Harrier GR3 is a far more capable Harrier at the same BR. So capable that it can go pretty aggressive and even be forgiven for a few mistakes, thanks to the countermeasures and Viffing with the upgraded engine being able to pull you out of some sticky situations. Sadly, my pullout game is weak, so moving on to the crayon munchers, the US Marine Corps also had Harriers. This is the Harrier AV-8A, the first American Harrier, and until just recently, a $60 premium. It went off sale like, I don't know, a month ago, after the May sale ended, so I guess you can't get it anymore as of this video. Well, we all know you should just give it a few weeks and Gaijin will spin up something stupid like US Marine Corps Day or First Flight Anniversary of the Harrier and bring it back as an overpriced GE premium. It's not like they've done that for every single one of the removed premium jets so far, right? Anyways, the AV-8A is a Harrier GR1 that fixed the two main problems of the GR1 at the same BR. Your weapons are better, since instead of the erectile dysfunction SRAMs and the dinky-ass Matra Sneb firecrackers, you get actual weapons, like the AIM-9G, plus the Mighty Mouse and the Zuni rocket pods. But you don't need to take those rocket pods because you get the ALE-37 countermeasures pod with, 240 fucking flares. You're the same BR as the flareless Harrier GR1, by the way. A Gaijin balancing department really smoked some plastic for this one. Anyways, you sadly still don't have a RWR. And all the added weight of the bigger missiles, bigger rockets, bigger weapons, and giant flare pod don't help your case much since you still have the same old Mark 101 engine of the GR1 instead of the upgraded Mark 103. But honestly, this is a very fun plane still, and definitely worth picking up if it comes back at a reduced price or on sale. Alternatively, you have the quote-unquote upgraded version in the tech tree. I say that because, I'm gonna be honest with you, with a plane as hot as the Harrier, having those 240 flares is a worthy trade-off in my book for the RWR and upgraded engine, but it all comes down to preference. I still find all the 9.7 Harriers fun, except the GR1. I will never recover from the mental distress of having to play that pile of shit. Anyways, back to the good Harriers. This is the AV-8C in the American tech tree, a 1979 upgrade meant to rectify the few problems found in the 8-year-old Harriers. The upgrades are basically the same as the British counterpart. You get an RWR, 60 countermeasures and a built-in dispenser, and the upgraded Mark 103 engine. The AV-8C, however, is probably my favorite first-gen Harrier to fly. The GR3 may have the coolest historical camo out of them all, but having a strap-on dildo attached to the nose of the plane just kills the cool look for me. The AV-8C, on the other hand, has the same body as the GR1 and the AV-8A, but with all the cool upgrades of the GR3, and arguably better ground ordnance on top of that. Technically, the RWR is also slightly better, but let's be real here, you're not going to notice a difference in the AV-8C and the GR1's RWR when all you're using it for is defending against shitter missiles from the dollar store, like the R3R or the AIM-9C. Let's be real here, if you're dying to an R3R or an AIM-9C, I recommend you turn off the bot script and actually play the game instead of being an AFK climbing retard. All in all, the first generation Harrier presents a very unique playstyle not found in any other aircraft at this BR range. They have decent missiles, and also some locked flight performance potential that you can unleash if you learn the art of controlling thrust vectoring VTOL nozzles. You can absolutely troll in a 1v1 with the VTOL capability, and the overall matchmaker for these planes is very forgiving. The first gen Harriers are some of the most fun I've had at this BR range, ever. Except this fucker. I writhe in pain and agony every night as I remember having to fly this bucket of piss. Fuck the Harrier GR1. All my homies hate the Harrier GR1. I hated fighting against it when it was overpowered, and now I hate flying it after it got nerfed into the ground. Anyways, the Royal Navy at this point saw the potential of the upgraded GR3s and decided to pursue their own VTOL fighter based on the Harrier. And that led to one of the most successful fighter aircraft in all of history. People always dick ride the Eagle and the Flanker's impressive KD ratios, but everyone forgets the most impressive of them all, the Sea Harrier. 23 kills, 0 deaths, and those 23 kills were actually against fighter aircraft of its era in hostile land. Instead of shooting down helicopters and transport planes and unarmed Arabs in 40-year-old jets then bragging about it, or eating shit and ruining your perfect KDR as soon as you fight someone with a smaller army than you in a 2-week special operation that lasted 2.5 years for some fucking reason. With your most notable air engagement after that being that you farted on a drone. Hey, at least it's funnier than shooting balloons, alright? Man, this comment section is gonna be full of cope after this joke. Anyways, the Sea Harrier story is actually quite an interesting one and deserves its own history section, but we're out of time, so I'm gonna try to keep this one short. Most people think it was just the Royal Navy seeing the Harrier finally work and going, yeah, we want one too. But that's a very severe oversimplification. You see, the Sea Harrier story started long before that. In fact, depending on who you ask, it technically started even before the normal Harrier. In the early 1960s, due to budget cuts and political shenanigans, the once almighty Royal Navy fleet was shrinking in size faster than my left testicle on a freezing day. By 1966, not only was Britain's last battleship retired, but Britain's future CVA-1 class of aircraft carriers was just straight up cancelled. Apparently it was too expensive or something. Sadly, with advancing aviation technology, the smaller World War II era carriers were just no longer able to accommodate new aircraft without major modification to both the aircraft and the carrier. Enter VTOL technology. In 1963, the Hawker P1127 prototype conducted the first vertical landing aboard the World War II era carrier HMS Ark Royal. This catapulted, or I should say vertically launched, the idea of the VTOL jet for the Navy, and they wanted a Harrier as well. So, when the new Invincible class carrier oops, I meant flat deck cruiser. Wait, what the fuck? A second concept for the future of naval aviation emerged in the early 1960s when the first of a new class of flat-deck cruisers was planned. These were very carefully and politically designated as cruisers, deliberately avoiding the term aircraft carrier to increase the chances of political funding in a hostile political climate against expensive capital ships. What? Wait, so you're telling me that the Soviets weren't the first ones to come up with the stupid idea of pretending that their aircraft carriers are cruisers for political reasons? Anyways, sadly, after a string of accidents and the shitty development of the Harrier that we already talked about, the Navy was no longer interested in a hovering death trap. But after realizing that there's literally no other option, because they literally had to get a VTOL, they went back to Hawker and decided to ask them for a specially modified Harrier variant for the Navy. You see, the Royal Air Force Harrier GR.1 was tailored for ground strike and reconnaissance. The Navy's Harrier, instead, was intended as an all-in-one aircraft. So instead of GR, it would receive the designation FRS, standing for Fighter, Reconnaissance, and Strike. As a result, their Harrier was required to not only have higher carrying capacity, but also better avionics. Research into the Sea Harrier concept began in the mid-60s, and after a lot of testing and modification, the new Sea Harrier FRS-1 would enter service in 1978, almost a full decade after the RAF got their Harrier GR1 into service. 4 years later, Argentina decided to do the funny, which culminated in the bra moment known as the Falklands War. And yeah, while the Harrier didn't do all the work, with honorable credit given to the Vulcans bombing Argentinian airfields and various other forms of early strike, the Sea Harrier was basically Britain's only fighter at sea at that point. And funnily enough, because of the rush to get them into combat when the war began, they were shipped to the Falklands on cargo ships, not aircraft carriers. And that VTOL capability proved to be its ultimate trump card at that point. It was also around this time that the Royal Navy pilots in their Sea Harriers would get their new Lima Sidewinder, or AIM-9L. A missile so good that, despite not receiving proper training on how to use it due to the rush to get to the Falklands, the Sea Harrier still managed one of the most successful combat records of all time for the Sidewinder. Up yours, US Air Force. The Sea Harrier would establish a kill record of 23-0, a perfect KDR, earning it a spot in history as one of the very few planes to do so. Anyways, in-game, the Sea Harriers come in two flavors across 3 models. Let's start with the FRS-1. You have 2 of these guys in the game. The FRS-1 early at 10.3 in the tech tree, and the normal FRS-1 as a squadron vehicle at 10.7, which you should pick up if you haven't already since it's so damn fun. Let's get this out of the way first. The only difference between the early at 10.3 and the normal at 10.7 is that the early at 10.3 only gets 2 AIM-9Ls, while the normal one at 10.7 gets 4. Honestly, the AIM-9L is such a good missile at this BR range, since many things you face don't even have flares, that having double the killing potential for only 1 BR step higher is a worthy trade-off in my opinion. Although some people may prefer the fact that 10.3 gets a few more down tiers than 10.7, again, it's up to personal preference. But if you only got the 10.7 one, since you didn't grind the tree for the 10.3 one and just went for the squadron vehicle, I just want you to know that you're not missing out on much. The FRS-1 differs from the Harrier GR3 in 3 main aspects. The first is its engine. The Sea Harriers get an even more powerful Pegasus Mark 104 engine, which outputs almost 100 kilograms more wet thrust than the Mark 103 found on the AV-8C and Harrier GR.3. The Mark 104 also has noticeably more overheating issues, but as long as you manage your throttle right and don't sit on full power all day, you'll be fine. Just be careful, otherwise your plane will be turned into fish and chips. The second difference is, as we already said, the missile selection. While the Harrier GR3 and AV-8C get rear aspect AIM-9Gs, the Sea Harrier FRS-1 gets all aspect AIM-9Ls. The final and most important difference, as you may have noticed, is the nose. The Sea Harriers have a longer, meaner looking nose, which in my book makes them the best looking Harriers. Since the first gen Harriers look like fat inflated tick bugs and the second gen Harriers have the 5-head canopy, the Sea Harrier just looks good. The nose isn't just for looks. It's for practicality. The Sea Harriers were all fitted with great radars for their all-weather fleet defense fighter role. The FRS-1 gets the Ferranti Blue Fox radar, a non-look-down radar with decent range, tracking, and of course IFF capability. It's not overpowered or anything, but it's still great for its battle rating. And that IFF is a godsend when flying this thing in simulator battles. In ARB, you can basically just use it for slaving AIM-9L launches, since your flight performance is still pretty mid, due to it being a first-generation Harrier chassis. All in all, the Sea Harrier FRS-1 is a very fun plane for its battle rating, and I personally talismaned the Squadron 1 to become my top-tier grinder for Britain, since the F4J UK is dogshit and the MiG-21 Bison did not exist back then, and I don't regret it, as the Sea Harrier FRS-1 is still loads of fun in the current matchmaker. Just be careful, you have one of the hottest engines out of all the Harriers, so your 60 flares are not going to do anything against most missiles launched at you in rear aspect at close range. As for the AIM-9L, yeah, it's great that you get 4 of them, but there's also other under-tiered subsonics that get them at this BR range. And because of the AIM-9L's incredible rear aspect flare resistance against hot targets, you're basically dead if you let an A6E or an A10 give you back shots, no matter the range. Of course, the Sea Harrier was the primary aircraft of the Royal Navy for many years, and as such, underwent a major upgrade in 1993 to slate it for service until the mid-2000s. This is the Sea Harrier FA.2. At this point, Britain had other aircraft for naval strike roles, such as the Buccaneer and the Phantom. As a result, the Sea Harrier FA.2 was envisioned purely as a fleet defense fighter. As a result, the FA.2 did not receive any new ground ordnance over the old Harriers. In fact, it carries even less ordnance than some of the old Harriers. However, in air-to-air combat, the Sea Harrier FA.2 is pretty unique. You see, this is the only modern Harrier that retained the old Gen 1 wings and body, so it still flies like dogshit. However, they crammed the Pegasus Mark 106 in this thing, the second best engine ever put in a Harrier. We'll talk about that first in just a bit. As a result, the Sea Harrier FA.2 can utilize some crazy viffing maneuvers, and in a VTOL dogfight, it's only matched by the other cracked up modernized Harriers. Or the AK-141 if you really want to get cocky. But the main attraction for this air-to-air fighter is its air-to-air fighting ability. Crazy idea, I know. For starters, you get avionics sets that are heavily modernized. You get a modern digital RWR, and on top of that you get the Blue Vixen radar, which is incredible at its battle rating with a powerful TWS mode and look-down shoot-down capability with pulse Doppler. But why would the Sea Harrier need a radar this good, you may be asking? Well, this is because the new Sea Harrier FA.2 is compatible with the AIM-120 AMRAAM, a medium to long-range active radar missile. This means 2 things. The first, if you're a normal player, is that at 12.3, where the FA.2 sits, it's not completely dead in the water to BVR combat. The second thing is that if you're retarded like me and just want to have fun, means that you can VTOL your way around and land in the center of the map behind a hill or something, and then roleplay as a mobile SAM site, launching SlamRAMs at any plane that comes within 15 kilometers of you, like that one guy from the hit anime Area 88. So despite not having great flight performance on paper, the Harrier, thanks to its VTOL capability, can hold its water very well and even surprise enemies in one-on-one dogfights by simply VTOLing inside their turning circle. I found the optimal loadout for the FA.2 to be 2 AIM-9Ms on one side, 1 cannon and 1 AMRAAM on the bottom, and an AMRAAM with a BOL countermeasures dispenser on the other wing. All in all, the Sea Harrier FA.2 at its own BR is a unique but very fun plane, relying on mastery of the controls and weapon systems to best its enemies, who will almost always have superior straight-line flight performance and top speed. Someone once said that a good navy is not a provocation to war, but a guarantee of peace, and my brother in Christ, there is nothing more peaceful than clobbering a poor wallet warrior with an AIM-120 across his forehead from my concealed hovering SAM site in the middle of the map. Go gadget concealed carry AMRAAM. A famous saying in the Royal Navy goes, "The nation which forgets its defenders will be itself forgotten." I don't know about my nation, but I'm sure the enemy team won't forget being clowned on by a SlamRAM launcher. Especially not when that launcher was flying with creative mode. Man, if these Harriers are this fun, I can't wait to try the Harriers that are objectively better in every way at the same BR, for some reason. What the hell, Gaijin? By now, you're probably asking yourself the same question the RAF and the US Marine Corps asked themselves in the mid-70s. Okay, so the Harrier was this fat, piece of shit, accident-prone, expensive, and high-maintenance bucket of crap. But for some reason, we can't stop using it. If the Harrier is so good, why didn't they make a second one? So at that point, McDonnell Douglas came in and was like, okay, this is gonna sound crazy, but boy, do I have some news for you. You see, in the mid-1970s, British Aerospace and McDonnell Douglas decided to get together to rebuild the Harrier from the ground up with the experience from the first-generation Harriers. This Harrier was vastly different in British and American service, so let's start with the British one. The British still favored the Harrier in the ground attack role, and as such, optimized their Harrier 2 for such roles. In-game, the Harrier GR.1 at 11.7 is the British Harrier 2, and it gets access to a new, far stronger engine, larger, reinforced and lightened wings with leading-edge root extensions, and an overall more robust airframe which makes it far more nimble in flight performance. You get full BOL rails that give you the small amount of just 700 fucking flares. You know, there was a point in time over a year ago where you just turn on periodic countermeasures in this fucker and just be immune to all incoming missiles for the next 6 minutes. The air-to-air loadouts are no slouch either. While you don't have a radar or any kind of long-range missiles, you still get AIM-9Ms at 11.7. The lowest BR plane to get AIM-9Ms, and that in itself is a war crime at this BR. You also get the AGM-65 Maverick for some serious airfield strike shenanigans against idiots who run back to their airfield. You also get a special kind of guns not found on any other plane, the Aiden-25. This is a special variant of the Aiden cannon we all know and hate, but now it's actually good. The 25mm Aiden has a higher rate of fire and a far higher muzzle velocity than the 30mm version. Basically, they just fixed the only problems the 30mm version had. The tracerless HVAP is so fast, it's basically a laser with almost no bullet drop. All in all, with 700 countermeasures, incredible dogfight performance, great IR missiles, and great guns, this thing is the penultimate Harrier for dogfighting. especially since it's also slightly lighter than the other Harrier 2. Some say it's a McDonnell experiment that went wrong, and that it only runs on deep fried cheese. All we know is that it isn't the Harrier 2 GR, but it's the Harrier 2 GR's American cousin. This is the AV-8B Plus Harrier 2, the fatter American counterpart. No, seriously, it weighs slightly more than the GR7, and as such, it dogfights just slightly worse, despite having a better engine. Considering its weight class and biffing ability, that's not going to make a difference. You can still dance on pretty much anything you face that isn't the Yak-141, and on top of this, the AV-8B Plus is far more optimized for air-to-air combat due to the multi-role requirements of the US Marine Corps. This thing has the literal radar of an FA-18 Hornet crammed into the nose, and on top of that, you get AIM-120 AMRAAMs and more missile hardpoints than the Sea Harrier to absolutely clown on people at long range. Or, if you're up for some trolling like me, just park it in VTOL and land in the middle of the map, popping up to launch AMRAAMs at anything that comes within 15 kilometers of you like a slightly more retarded SAM site. Oh, and your gun is the best gun put on a Harrier in my opinion. There is no way around this. It's literally the LAV-25's gun. They done put a fucking tank cannon on a plane, and my brother in Christ, it just fucking works. Shit disintegrates enemy planes at 3,600 Big Macs per school shooting. This thing is so good it made me better at everything, even social skills. I can now set up a formal business meeting between the enemy pilot and a 25mm HVAP shell. However, keep in mind that you don't have some of the epic gamer upgrades of the Harrier GR7, such as the 700 flares and bull rails. Instead, the AV-8B Plus gets 180 countermeasures and modified dispensers in the tail, and while you do have the single best engine put in a Harrier, you're also heavier than the GR7, just enough to be slightly worse at overall dogfighting. But Viffing potential? Oh goodness, those Su-27s and F-15s won't know what hit them. But I do. It was a 25mm semi-armor-piercing high-explosive incendiary tracer anti-tank shell, right in the balls. And all in all, the Harrier 2s are some of the most fun planes I have flown in the entire game in a while. They really fit every playstyle, especially the AV-8B Plus. Whether it's aggressive dogfighting, mindless Fox 3 slinging, or VTOL trolling, I know that no match in the AV-8B Plus will go the same as the last. And that's really saying something in the mindless meta of taking off and spamming Fox 3s repeatedly this update. This plane is not meta. This plane isn't really good or bad, but it stands for everything the Harriers are in this game, and reiterates the point that I spoke about in this video. It's a fun and unique challenge. It's a skillful plane that has its own special playstyle, and most of all, it's a fucking Harrier. Donut. Surely a plane this fun comes with a catch, right? Yeah, it's called grinding the Italian tech tree. Or I guess Gaijin can add one to the American tech tree as well literally the day after I finish the script for this video. Sure, why fucking not? It wouldn't be a meme guide anyways without Gaijin making it outdated instantly, right? But by all means, the Harrier 2 is a plane of all time, and in War Thunder, fun comes at a price. So to reiterate the last question, what does the Harrier sacrifice? Kindness, tranquility, love. I've given up all chance of peace the day I started playing top tier. I share my griefs with ghosts. I load into these matches every day to an equation that there is only one answer to. We are damned. The IRCCM, the Fox 3s, the bull, the multipathing, the unwillingness to yield, the eagerness to fight it set us all on a path that there is no escape from. I yearned to be an ace pilot in the Harrier without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look back, there is no longer a team to fight for. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I will never see. On the other side of this fight was never an audience or a light of gratitude. It was only a wall of enemy missiles. So, what does the Harrier sacrifice? Everything. Alright, let's get your shiny new Harrier spaded. Starting with the Harrier GR.1 and the AV-8C, they basically have the same modifications tree, but shuffled around in different orders for the ground ordnance and the last tier. Start tier 1 with the chaff modification, so you can take a little of that now that we have separate keybinds for flare and chaff in game. The chaff is the ultimate tool at high altitude at this BR, since a single pop is guaranteed to defeat all pulse-guided radar missiles, such as the R3R, AIM-9Z, and the R530 that you face. Moving on to tier 2, get the AIM-9G and the new boosters. At tier 3 for the AV-8C, get the G-suit and the wings repair, before moving on to tier 4. For the Harrier GR.3, since these last few mods are in the wrong place for some fucking reason, get the wings repair and engine instead. At tier 4 for the GR.3, start with the G-suit, then go back and work on whatever you want, and finish the rest of the performance upgrades. For the AV-8C, basically the same thing, but instead get engine and cover at tier 4 before going back to work on what you want. Moving on to the Sea Harrier FR.1. Both of them have the same exact modifications tree. Get the chaff modification, then the G-suit and the new boosters. At tier 3, get the AIM-9L and the wings repair. Finally, at tier 4, get the engine upgrade, then go back and work on the rest of the performance upgrades. For the FA.2, start with the AIM-9L, then the bolt pods and new boosters. After that, get the G-suit and AIM-9Ms, then the wing repair. And finally, get the AIM-120B before going back to finish the rest of the modifications in whatever order you please. Finally, the Harrier 2. For the GR7, start with the chaff upgrade, then move on to airframe and new boosters. At rank 3, get the G-suit, AIM-9L, and bolt dispensers. Finally, at tier 4, get the AIM-9M, engine upgrade, and then go back and work on whatever you want. I do advise though that you get the upgraded 25mm belts, since the HVAP shell, while lacking any explosive filler, has such a high muzzle velocity that it's basically a laser with almost no bullet drop at normal gun range. Also pick up the AGM-65 Maverick, since you can take one of those without sacrificing any air-to-air missiles, specifically to remove idiots who think it's safe to land on the airfield. As for the AV-8B+, the Italian and the American one have identical modification trees. Start with chaff, then the G-suit and the new boosters. At rank 3, get the AIM-9L, cover, and wings repair. Finally, at rank 4, get the AIM-9M, AIM-120B, and engine upgrades, before going back to work on remaining performance upgrades. As before, make sure to get the gun upgrades down the line as well, since the GAU-12 equalizer cannon on the AV-8B has a unique selection of great shells, and when upgraded, the gun is pretty accurate and easy to aim. Also pick up the AGM-65s for the same reason as before. And there you have it. That's the Harrier family spaded and ready to rumble. Some people only care about military aviation for the wacky designs and their spectacular crashes. How for every good and successful plane there was probably tens, if not hundreds, that failed hilariously. I can really understand the appeal of that. While it's easy to write this off as mindless carnage, there is something spectacular about it on a deeper level. You see, in aviation there are plenty of stories of glory and successful aircraft. But the wisest lessons are always taught by catastrophic failure. In order to truly appreciate something at its greatness, you have to witness it at its most dysfunctional. In tense moments, the accidents tell us more than any kill-death ratio or national propaganda ever could. And it's from these accidents that aviation learns from its mistakes and forges a future defying all norms and imagination of its time, creating a truly spectacular aircraft. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot to me. Also feel free to join our Discord server to vote on what plane you want for the next video. And until next time, go out there, don't crash on takeoff, and go show those pesky enemies in a dogfight how you can switch into creative mode. See you next time.